especially with my brother taking Stanley Jackson from the Pistons right before this pick and taking away Reggie Jackson from me. So,
yeah, I mean, I like the Patty Mills pick because it's your timeline of your team is kind of win now. Patty Mills is he has playoff experience. He's played in the finals. He's consistently shot at three or around the 40% range. He's not the greatest defender, but he plays hard, which is something that I think Pop values. That's why he keeps him around. The Marvin Williams pick, I mean, again, he's an older guy. I was a little bit surprised you picked him, but I'm not totally against it because he is a forward.
Yeah, I mean, with both these picks, I had the win now mode mentality, essentially playoff mentality. So that's where these two picks came from.
All right, so I'm gonna go over my last two picks, which my first one was Thon Maker from the Milwaukee Bucks. From Milwaukee, we protected Giannis Antetokounmpo, we protected Chris Middleton, Eric Bledsoe, and their other point guard,
Malcolm Brogdon.
Malcolm Brogdon, yes. I'm taking Thon here because he's young, he's 7 feet tall, he's shown flashes in at least one round of each the past two playoffs that he's okay. He can, block some shots. He's got a defensive mentality. And he has been working on improving his three. I mean, he's never shot over 30%, but he is, working on it. He's trying to make himself a small ball five. So I figured at this spot, this was a risk worth taking. So I took Thon Maker, and I'm, happy with it. And, it won't hurt the team. And then my last pick, I probably taking my biggest swing here. I'm taking Mario Hezonja, who was a pick 3 years ago for the Orlando Magic, but now he's with the New York Knicks. The New York Knicks, we protected Kristaps Porzingis, we protected Frank Ntilikina, Kevin Knox, and I believe Courtney Lee.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Mario Hezonja is a shooting guard who was the fifth pick in the draft, I believe, 3 years ago. He was supposed to come out and be a really good player. It didn't pan out, but, he kind of to go along with Stanley Johnson, which I believe they were in the same draft class together. I'm just taking the swing on him again because I feel like maybe on this team where, we are missing some offensive firepower. We have shooters, but my team doesn't necessarily have playmakers. Mario Hezonja might be that guy who comes out and becomes that guy, right? So I'm not expecting it, but if I could see it happen, I could see it happening on a team like this where they need, an alpha dog. My team doesn't have these alpha dogs, so Hezonja can, it'd be nice if he comes out to be that guy and he reaches his potential.
Okay, and both of those picks were going to be my last selections before they were taken. So obviously, I like them both. I think these are both high upside picks on a team like yours. I think that makes perfect sense. I think both these players are actually very solid defensive players. So I definitely like them. And that left me not many options due to the fact that my team already had accumulated a salary total of $116 million, a little over $116 million. So I had to make a selection of a player that is under $4 million. We only had 7 teams left from which to choose players from. I decided to go with the only incoming rookie in Kevin Huerter from Atlanta, on which we protected Trae Young. We protected Kent Bazemore, John Collins, and Taurean Prince. So Kevin Huerter, excellent shooter, actually panned out really well in terms of advanced stats and on defense, so should become a very solid 3-and-D guy, hopefully in the future. Obviously wouldn't get much playing time in his rookie year on this team, which is trying to win now. However, he should, in the future, would probably establish himself as a nice rotation piece, if not an above-average starter on this team. So that was the final pick of the draft. I will review my team real quickly, and then we'll turn it over to Sebastian, who will go through his team. Starting lineup is Chris Dunn, Will Barton, Gordon Hayward, Julius Randle, and DeMarcus Cousins. Looking a little further into the depth chart, Patty Mills, backup point guard. Buddy Hield, a backup shooting guard. Marvin Williams, backup small forward. Pascal Siakam, backup power forward. And Vucevic as the backup center. And then my 11 and 12th guys are Kelly Olynyk and Kevin Huerter. I think, especially looking at the lineup, it's a very offensive-minded lineup. You get a little more defense from the bench, and especially some of the big guys off the bench, and still some scorers as well. Some guys who could really hit 3-pointers, which was what the basis of what I was going for off the bench was a lot of 3-and-D guys, a lot of guys who could play defense and still score a little bit. So that is my team. Looks like hopefully it probably would at least compete for the playoffs, depending on what conference it would be. Probably the Western Conference since it's Las Vegas. But let me turn it over to you. Give me your opinion and then give me your...
Yeah, I mean, obviously being in the West would be the difficult part. I mean, if this team is in the East, they for sure compete in the playoffs. I wouldn't know if I say they probably would make it, right?
Probably in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, in the Eastern Conference. So, yeah, in the West, it'll be competition. People were talking about before the start of last year how great the West was going to be, and then injuries happened. Denver slipped. Minnesota got a little bit worse. Like, the Clippers obviously had their Blake Griffin thing happen. So these things happen in the NBA. Yes, there might be 10 teams who now, or 11 teams who now, who potentially look like they're going to compete in the West. But it doesn't mean that it's going to end up panning out in the actual season. So a team like this, especially when Cousins comes back, yes, they can compete in the West. And, there's a chance they make the playoffs.
Okay.
Now we're going to go over my team, and then I'll talk about what I like about my team, and then what I think it's missing. My starting lineup would be, I would start Josh Hart at point guard with Avery Bradley as the 2, Covington as the 3, TJ Warren as the small ball 4, and Derek Favors. My backup starting lineup would be Domantas Sabonis as the 5, Jeremy Grant as the 4, Stanley Johnson as the 3, Tyus Jones as the 1, and Tomas Satoransky as the 2, with Thon McCurr and Mario Hezonja with the extra 2 guys. And, that could all be interchangeable because all these players, like, one of the things I think is the detriment to this team is that there is no alpha dog. So I would want to give chances to all these 12 players, right? Because all these 12 players have some potential. So I think, minutes would have to be distributed pretty fairly. I don't know if there would be a player on this team who would necessarily deserve, at least at this point, to play over 30 minutes, especially since they are a young team. They're not making it to the playoffs, and in the West at least. And, you want to figure out who they are, who are the good players. I will say this. One thing I like about my team is some of the cap flexibility. Because right now they would have a salary cap of about $84 million, but some of the contracts they have taken can really get them to a spot where next year, for instance, they can. Derek Favors' contract is unprotected.
Yeah, well, Favors and Bradley are both not guaranteed for next year. Both of them have, I know Bradley has a very small guaranteed portion of his contract. Yeah. Favors, I'm not 100% sure, but most of it is unguaranteed.
Well, Bradley's actually team option. So they can get rid of the whole contract. Favors is the one that has a non-guaranteed second year. Mario Hezonja on a 1-year deal. Stanley Johnson, his deal, they don't have to match it because he's coming off a rookie contract. So if they wanted to, this team can go down, and I think they can come up with, especially with the salary cap going up to $108 million, they might be able to create 2 max spots with like $44 million.
Yeah, it'd be very close. I know Warren's, Covington's, and Jeremy Grant's contract all add up to about, I believe it's a little over $30 million. Each one of them is signed for, I know Grant is for 3 years, Covington and Warren for 4 years. Each one of them at about $10 million apiece. I know Jeremy Grant is at about $9 million apiece, and Covington and Warren at about $10 million apiece. It'd be close. They'd probably be able to get just under 2 guaranteed contracts, but extremely close.
Yeah, and I think some of these decent pieces. Seattle would be a good. People loved playing at Seattle. They had great fans. So if they want to, they might be able to actually get two people to come out play. Maybe it'd be like the cool thing to go play with this expansion team. So they have this cap flexibility there. That's one thing I like about them. And the other thing is, if they really wanted to, they could probably trade any of these players just because of their contracts being affordable. It's like Covington, Warren, Grant. These are all affordable contracts for decent players.
Yeah, looking at the roster, I think it's very similar. I think the best comparison of a roster to compare this to is the Los Angeles Clippers, in which they don't really have one superstar, but there's a lot of very solid players, a decent amount of good defensive players, young players, and players on short contracts, along with a couple players on some longer contracts. So I think the defensive identity of this team would be fantastic. I think, again, in the Eastern Conference, they'd probably be able to compete for an 8 seed with Miami and Cleveland. Probably even beat out those teams due to their defensive prowess. So probably it looks like this would probably be an 8 seed in the Eastern Conference and a team that could potentially grow to something better in the future.
Yeah, I mean, their biggest problem, again, is that alpha dog. They don't have that scorer. They have no one. I mean, T.J. Warren averaged about 19 points a game. But other than that, these guys are mostly, from the 10 to 12 range, if that high. So, I feel like...
Well, unless Josh Hart becomes that alpha dog. That's my hope.
Josh Hart might be, and that's why we took Hazonia. And that was my hope for those two guys. Obviously, T.J. Warren can improve a little bit. Satoransky's the other guy who might not become like a 20 points a game scorer, but you could see him with his shooting capability become a 16, something like 16 in a perfect world. I think, again, what it panned out is Danny had this team that is more for win now. I mean, Hayward and Cousins are both, I believe, under the age of 30. I mean, they're close.
They are, yeah.
So it's not like they're super old. I think the oldest player we took in this draft was Marvin Williams, who is at the age of, 31?
31, I believe, 32. Patty Mills is close to 30, probably, I think, a little over 30. Those are the two oldest players. Olynyk, Vucevic, both about 27, 28. Everyone else, I think Hayward, Cousins are both about 27, 28 as well. So, yeah, I mean, I made sure to try to keep the team, especially after taking Cousins, try to select players who did not miss a lot of time due to injury. I obviously did that with Hayward and Cousins. Hayward seems to be on a good track of recovering. Vucevic is another guy who's got a little bit of an injury history, played in about 55 games last year. But I protected myself with a group of bigs, as Olynyk is a 4 and a 5, and Marvin Williams could also play the power forward. Probably actually plays a little bit more at the power forward position, but I put him at the small forward position for my team just because of the influx of bigs.
And I think one thing we could also discuss is like the biggest losers of the draft. I think it's quite obvious the biggest losers would be the Boston Celtics for losing Gordon Hayward. And then maybe Philadelphia 76ers because they lose Covington.
Yeah, I think with Covington, I think the Sixers have a pretty deep roster that they'd be able to replace Covington fairly easily. I mean, obviously, no matter what, no matter if you lose a player of Covington who's a 3-and-D guy, one of the best defensive players in the league, you're going to hurt. But there might be other teams.
I mean, the Oklahoma City Thunder also because they lose they don't have a lot of depth, and just to lose Jeremy Grant, who they just re-signed, can be hurtful to them.
Yeah, Denver Nuggets losing Will Barton again. They don't have much depth behind Gary Harris and Will Barton at the wing position. So losing a wing would be pretty detrimental to their team this year.
Obviously, Atlanta is high on Kevin Huerter, so they would be upset. But that's there's obviously nothing to happen. I think the biggest winners here. I think the Spurs, I mean, I know Pop loves Patty Mills. I don't, and I don't like his contract so much. So I think the Spurs being here would be a good winner because that also gives up the chance to play their other rookie. I mean, their rookie from last year, Derek White, a little bit more, who has a very similar game to Patty Mills.
Charlotte and Miami. Olynyk, I believe, has 3 years left in his contract at about $10 million, and they're pretty close to the luxury cap. Similar to the Charlotte Hornets, who Marvin Williams has 2 years remaining on his contract at about, I believe it's $14 million a year. They'd be happy to get rid of that contract. essentially, especially if they want to resign Kemba Walker, because if they do resign Kemba Walker, as of now,